Welcome to Upcancel Ledgebounce, presented by Downb. This is Wisely.
Joined by Jaaahsh.
Instead of the typical end of the year look back, we're going to do something a little different this episode, talking about what the future holds by asking big questions about the Smash scene at large in our 2016 year in preview.
Wisely and I felt it important to get this year in preview out before the end of the year, so I'm reporting in from Rhode Island, Wisely's reporting in from Minnesota, and as you can tell, our recording equipment isn't up to what it usually is.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to go over in 2016, starting with the immediate.
What the heck is going on with Genesis?
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Genesis starts in about 2 weeks, the 15th through the 17th of January.
To date, it's the second largest Melee tournament and the second largest Smash 4 tournament. Smash 4 dwarfed by EVO, and Melee dwarfed by...
Melee is also dwarfed by EVO.
Oh, is it both EVO? Okay, there you go.
Melee is currently about 100 people below EVO, and I believe Smash is like 1,500.
900, yeah, something very, very intense amounts of difference for Smash 4. But for Melee, it's certainly on the same level as the largest Melee tournament.
It has Genesis as a tournament series has a much larger history with Melee, considering Smash 4 is so new in the scene.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And it's a huge benefit for the Smash 4 community, at least, to have an event at this size. I mean, I don't think when Genesis 3 was announced that anyone expected Smash 4 to be such a presence, and for it to be the second largest tournament, partially because there were no caps, unlike Big House, which offered a cap for Smash 4 and this sort of thing. It's really bloomed into a huge Smash 4 event. And of course Melee, and we have, of course, the storied Mango Armada rivalry.
The Mango Armada rivalry started... not started, but it really came to a head at the first Genesis.
And Wisely and I are lucky enough in a couple of weeks to be heading out to California, so we'll be there on the ground for Genesis 3, and we'll be sure to record an episode while we're there. But in terms of, us as players, it's a super exciting time to be around to see how these Melee rivalries develop, and even if, for those unaware, Armada and Mango are 1-1 in terms of Genesis overall wins, and this might be the third Genesis that puts one above the other. Or someone new entirely out of those two might win. We might see an HBox or a Mewtwo King win, though probably a little unlikely.
I think we're almost as likely to see Leffen. We might see Leffen on a comeback after the end, dwindling at the end of 2015.
And even beyond the player narratives, from us as TOs, there's a lot that's interesting about Genesis. And one of the biggest things that was noted early on is the sort of not so clear corporate sponsorship. With other large events like EVO or with Big House, the sponsors who are supporting the event, the VG boot camps, the gaming generations, these were readily apparent at all stages of both registration but also the event itself. Looking at the Genesis website and looking at Genesis materials, it's somewhat unclear if there's corporate backing or if this is a sort of new version of grassroots or what. It's very unclear, actually.
It feels to me like a really weird mix of grassroots and esports, but I don't know if it's a mix in a way that is going to work very well. And that's what's scary.
At least when it was announced, that was the fear, was that it didn't seem to be working very well. But since then, there's sort of been a very clear notion that, money has been raised. The event does exist. It shattered its own expectations for early registrants. I remember when the day it was announced, there was, I think, 250 people would get something special for signing up early. And the first day was like, I think the number was...
It was like 10 minutes and that was gone.
I think it was 600 or 700 in the first period of registration. I was one of them that just crashed in and said, we want to be a part of this. Sign us up. Don't care. We didn't have hotel information. We didn't have any sort of information. It was just the allure of the Genesis series that said it for all of us.
Mm-hmm. And we're at a point in Smash now where there are tournaments like that. If Juggle Guy announced Big House 6 tomorrow and said, we're having Big House 6, and that's all he said, he'd have early registers.
There are folks who have already set up for EVO.
We don't even know that any Smash game is going to be at EVO yet. We can assume. But we have no confirmation that any Smash game is going to be at EVO. It's a fighting game tournament. They're not required to host Smash. But we still have people that are saying, like, nope, I'm just booking this time out of my schedule because I'm going to be there.
And one of the big things I think that makes this grassroots hybrid thing so interesting and stands out to me as a sort of outside observer, someone who's not involved with the running of Genesis at all, is their use of the compendium system. Something announced a little bit later after registration had started. that it was that Genesis was going to be using a similar compendium system that Big House 5 had used so successfully months before.
Mhm. But this compendium didn't start without its share of detractors.
Oh, for sure. Very popularly, Chibo of Clash Tournaments posted a very, very long video after the compendium was announced, talking about the different points and how he disagreed with both the size of the compendium, but also the sort of extortion to which we were held as Smash players for the certain kinds of rewards. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that we didn't experience a whole lot of pushback at Big House because it was novel. But now that Genesis has set it as a thing that may continue with these national sized tournaments, there's a lot of scrutiny onto what sort of levels the compendium can reach and what sort of perks the compendium might offer to the players going to the event.
This is the third tournament that's in the last 3 months that's used a compendium style. I know that Tipped Off actually had a mini compendium. It was going on at the same time as Smash Summit, and instead of it being perks where if you donate for this, we're going to do like non-esports commentary, or we're going to have this person fly out. Well, actually, no, it was people flying out. They were able to provide more, and they had like an art shop that was going towards it at the same time. In fact, by donating to them, you were also able to get summit votes.
Oh, I didn't know
Yep.
that.
Yes.
I wasn't aware of
So this has already been cemented as the new thing in Smash is donating money to tournaments.
And so I think this suggests the question then, not only what's going on with Genesis, but another big question we can talk about today is what does the compendium trend say about esports in Smash in 2016? In our intro
Mhm.
podcast, we sort of hinted that esports and esportsing, I think I used it as an intransitive verb, um, is something that we'll have to grapple with as TOs. But what is this compendium phenomenon in majors and also in smaller events like Tipped Off mean for the state of esports in 2016?
Certainly. Yeah. Um, I think one of the immediate things is, like we said, there's a compendium, but we don't have any clear corporate sponsor. Whereas Big House had both. Big House had people helping out with setups, whether that's gaming generations, things like that. They had people helping out with video. They had people helping out with supplies. We don't know any of that about Genesis. This might be entirely compendium run. And what does that mean for the way that money is funneled into Smash from now on?
Do you think of compendiums as grassroots? Would you consider a compendium part of a sort of new grassroots?
I feel like compendiums are trying to bridge the gap between grassroots and esports. And I don't know if it's a viable model. I think the more we see compendiums, the more that people are going to start pushing back. A lot of the pushback for the current Genesis one was how much money it costs to get between the different, I guess, the different steps in the ladder, and then what each of those was going towards. Versus having a sponsor means that that sponsor is getting advertising, but we're not guaranteed any, or you're not guaranteeing anything based on like how much the sponsor gives. That sponsor is giving advertising, and then they're able to give either money towards different things, or they're able to provide supplies or resources. One puts the onus on a company, and one puts it on the scene at large. And eventually, I feel like people are going to feel like they're being held hostage, where because 3 tournaments a month are having compendiums, if they're not donating, then we're just not going to ever have any tournaments again, or any major tournaments.
And so, what then to you makes a modern grassroots tournament? In the light of esports, in the light of the sort of
Mm-hmm.
monetization of the experience of a tournament, what defines grassroots in 2016?
And it's a term that isn't very well defined. The idea of grassroots is that it's community driven. It's community driven by the community for the community, which certainly compendiums are. Compendium started as an idea with the Dota community, and it's something that Valve put in so that they were able to raise money for the international TI. It's what their major tournament is, similarly to what we would call any of our super majors.
What's
Um,
interesting about that, though, and I think what's something that stands to be thought about, is as we bridge this gap and as we start to borrow these more successful tournament elements from other esports organizations like Dota, it's interesting to look at and focus on how the kinds of compendiums are different, though. In Smash, the compendiums we've had so far, and granted, there's only been a tiny number, and there's been more than the 3 we've mentioned for smaller tournaments, but they've all focused on you give some money, you get some product, a t-shirt, a poster, a sticker, whatever,
Often it's a side event that's able to happen. Stuff
and
like that.
and you give money to make the event more rich. What happens with Dota is you spend money, get something that happens in game, because of course Valve is running it, so Valve in Dota's case can give you a special item, a special skin, whatever.
Yeah, we're not going to be able to get a Cloud9 skin for Fox and Melee.
And what happens is the compendium levels are different things you unlock as a player. The money, a chunk of the money, I think this year the Invitational is 25% of the money spent on these things, goes towards the prize pool for sure. But as you get higher and higher compendium levels, instead of things like non-esports commentary or certain commentators or players getting flown out, it's all things like special cursors or new skins. It's things for the end user. And so what's interesting between Smash and Dota is that Smash is using the money to bolster its own events in a clear way, where Dota is using it to bolster its own events as prize pools. One of the more telling things is this year in August, the Dota International that happened in August had a prize pool of over $18 million supported by the compendium that it ran. The first place team made $6.6 million, a prize that had been sponsored heavily by the compendium pouring money into that prize pool. And I think it's interesting that what Smash does is the trend right now seems to be you give money towards levels, and some of those levels, sure, have pot bonuses, but they're static.
Yes.
Every pot bonus has been 5,000 more to Melee, 1,000 more to Smash 4 teams, or whatever the case may be. Where in Dota and in many other compendiums, it's a variable number depending on the amount of money that comes in. And so that's interesting.
You would never see like at you would never see at $5,000 in the compendium, we're going to fly out CLG. We're going to fly out TSM. And that's what a lot of the Smash compendiums are used for, is to get players out that usually wouldn't be able to.
And even that harbors some controversy. There's a lot to be said from Chibo outlined it really well in his video. A lot of the people who get benefited from compendiums either are planning on going otherwise or
have sponsors
or frequently get sponsored by these compendiums. Ice, for instance, was on both the Big House and the Genesis compendium.
I believe None was as well.
And the question remains, why is it on the players to get why is it on the spectators, to get those players out?
And for Ice's instance, Ice is sponsored by My Insanity. He has an official team. And it's just really interesting that a lot of these players, and we get it, they're from overseas. Things are going to cost a lot more to get here. But when does compendium end and when does actual corporatism begin? And I think all this talk leads us to the next big question. What is the state of money in Smash Bros. In 2016?
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid question to ask, especially as we saw in 2015 prize pools getting larger and larger and larger, though of course nothing similar to the $18 million that the Dota Invitational that I cited is. But if you go and look up the top 10 prize winnings of all time in Smash, 6 of them were in the last 12 months. You have 5 of them from Melee, Smash Summit with $11,500 for its first prize winner, Evo 2015 first prize getting $11,000, DreamHack Winter getting $10,000, DreamHack London getting $10,000, the Big House 5 winner getting $7,500, and then also we had one in Smash, Evo 2015 again, both Melee and Smash 4. Smash 4 winner Zero in that case got $11,500. None of these are the biggest prizes ever given out in Smash. These are numbers 2 through 8 or 2 through 7 with a couple of things. There was a Brawl tournament that happened in Texas in 2009, I believe, where the winner got $16,000. And so it's not like
I haven't heard of that one.
It's not like these are the only tournaments that are handing out this amount of money, but the fact that there are 6 of the 10 biggest ones in the last year suggests that we're moving very, very quickly towards a much more money-heavy first prize.
2 of them were in the same week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Smash Summit and DreamHack London were the same weekend.
And Evo, of course, number 1 and number 2 were the same event.
Well, yeah.
So Evo by itself, I mean, talking about standards of larger and larger tournaments, Evo broke all sorts of records in the last year. I know we said we were going to look ahead and not back, but Evo 2015 set a precedent for enormity. I mean, there was just thousands of people for both Smash 4 and Melee, and of course all the other fighting games they had. The prizes for those games were ridiculous. And even though Smash 4 and Melee had the largest attendance, they did not have the largest prizes. And this speaks a little bit to, if we want to talk about the state of money, we should also sort of talk about the state of corporatism.
Mm-hmm.
Nintendo remains not very, very excited about the Smash competitive scene in terms of monetary support. They've certainly been very, very present this year, and I expect them to continue to be fairly present going forward, but they've not been especially supportive monetarily towards making prize pools larger and larger and thus attracting a larger audience. And that's not necessarily a criticism. If it's not what Nintendo wants to do, that's their prerogative. But looking forward, I don't see them becoming the kind of company like Riot that pours millions of dollars into Smash.
I've been telling people, anybody that's asked me for a while, once Smash 4 stops selling at the current pace it is. So I don't know if that's when DLC stops. I don't know if that's just eventually the game peters out. And people still play it. People still play it a ton. But when it stops selling, I don't think we're going to see Nintendo anymore, or at least in any sort of sponsorship role.
So now I want to ask a sort of question that interests me a little more than it might interest you. What does Smash 4 look like in 2016?
I mean, I pay a little bit of attention to Smash 4. Currently, the big thing has been the new DLC that's coming out, I believe in February, with Corrin, Bayonetta, and one more.
No, that's it.
It is it?
Yep.
All right.
But yeah, in terms of what we know officially, those are the end. That's the end of the list of characters. We're not going to get anything more substantial after that. They'll come with Bayonetta will come with a stage. Corrin will not. But that's as far as we know it, which is an interesting question, an interesting polemic for the Smash 4 community, because ever since November, we've always had patches and new characters and stages and some surprises to look forward to. But in February,
I don't think anybody ever expected Shields to change.
No, yeah, absolutely. But come February, should Corrin and Bayonetta be released on time, is that the end? And the patch that comes with them, makes some changes as they always do. Is that the end of Smash 4 changing? And is that going to impact the competitive scene in a certain way? If somehow we know, and most likely we won't know, but if somehow we know that Nintendo's not going to be doing any more patches, does the scene change somewhat? The metagame for Smash 4 has always been marked by what patches are going to nerf what characters next, what patches are going to buff what characters next, how will new characters enter the fray. I mean, up until now, we haven't seen a lot of new characters doing a lot of work outside of Ryu. I predict a few Mewtwo's and probably more than a few Clouds rather at Genesis. But up until now, DLC hasn't mattered a whole lot, barring, of course, Dreamland and the entire stage list. But what does 2016 hold for a potentially static Smash 4?
Mm-hmm. And that, which is something that, for example, Melee has been experiencing for its entire existence. With the a small add-on of POW, depending on if you live in Europe or not. But I think it means something very different for a community that is used to receiving patches. You guys get super excited. You see so many threads, so many examples of people who are saying this is something I noticed in the announcement video, or the day that the patch comes out, all I see are things about okay, I tested this, and can someone else test this? And I have this theory that this thing might work now.
Right.
It seems that you guys get a lot of life from what do the new patches bring?
And will that life,
solidly just it's done?
And will that life suffer when we don't have things to look forward to like this? And that's something interesting that we can look forward to in 2016.
And if we're going to talk about something that really is on your radar, I want to bring up something that's been on my radar, which is PM.
Oh, absolutely. The PMDT disbanding was an enormous event in 2015. And I don't think you need to play PM to realize how monumental it'll be looking forward.
Mm-hmm. This year has kind of shown PM is in turmoil. I don't think it's dying, but it's certainly had its ups and downs, whether it's not being streamed anymore, the PMDT disbanding, but also having some of the biggest PM tournaments we've ever had have all happened in this last year. And I think what the future is holding is, for sure, we have a stable build. We're not having any dev team changes. What we have is what we get.
Hey, that sounds familiar.
No, there's a lot of similarities right now between the Smash 4 and the PM like outlooks of what is going to happen. Currently, the community is kind of divided. You're having a few people calling for 3.61, which if you are not following the PM debacle, 3.61 was a leaked patch of 3.6, which is the current build. 3.61, all it had was some small bug fixes. For example, Link has an issue with the end of his grab, or there's some small issues with tethering, or like very small things. But it was never an official release. The thing is, almost all of the notice we're getting about 3.61 is coming from people on Reddit. It's coming from people on Twitter. As far as I've been able to tell, every single TO that I've talked to, and I'm also actually in contact with several, I guess they're still called PM dev team members, despite the team not existing. But I've talked to several of them, and they are vehemently against running 3.61. As far as I understand, it could be very detrimental to the life of any of the old members. And so because of that, you have this weird dichotomy of a lot of community members yelling for 3.61 and a lot of TOs yelling, no, that's not happening. And a lot of people think like, oh, this is going to be a community thing. This is going to be like, once we just get enough people to switch over, it'll all be this. Or whether your side is 3.6 or 3.61. As far as I'm seeing from any of my back knowledge, any of my behind the scenes knowledge, 3.6 is what we're getting.
What's interesting too is that this is a similar situation that Brawl found itself in later in Brawl's life, not with necessarily different patches, of course, but with different rule sets and with different ways of playing the game. And so it's interesting that PM faces a similar crossroads.
Yep. Right now, one of the other big things with PM is a unified rule set. Currently, we're all trying to figure out how are we going to play this game? And it might not be the same instance as like the 2 and 3 stock debate that's Smash 4 is having right now, but what stages do we play this game on? Or at least what stages do we play this game on competitively? Because there's a lot of stages that could be legal, but the current consensus is that there's too many of them, which is an odd place to be in. But there's too many stages and it becomes overwhelming. So we're trying to figure that out right now. Looks like what we're moving towards is what's being called the Nebraska 9. It's the same stage list that we've been using in Minnesota. If you want to complain about the name, go for it, because we came up with it the same week they did. They just had a snappier title. But that's the idea. Like,
it does have a snappier title.
It does. The Nebraska 9 sounds really good. The Minnesota, Nebraska, like major happenstance doesn't sound quite as interesting.
No. So then looking forward, what it makes sense to ask you is, what do you see as PM's way forward in 2016? I mean, there's already steps towards a unified rule set, sure, but we still have to deal with, as a Smash community, the oversight of corporations that don't want to deal with PM. And PM still has to exist a little bit in the shadows, for better or worse.
Yeah, no, it certainly does. No matter how you slice it, PM is a mod. It's never not going to be a mod. And I mean, what you're seeing a lot of right now is different regionals hosting it. And often they're hosting it like right before a national for the other games. Like we were talking about Genesis earlier. There is no PM at Genesis. There's not going to be any side events. We're not allowed to run one. But there is going to be a major PM tournament the weekend right before it. Called Final Boss, also in NorCal. You're seeing it as a side event at a lot of other tournaments. I've said before that right now, I think the next 6 months determine what happens to PM. Either we start seeing a lot of grassroots, or you start seeing some of the few organizations that don't care about it. And by don't care about it, I mean they don't care about it enough to squash it. You're going to see it pop up as side events, or you're going to see it pop up as a full-fledged event at places. But it's any of the events that don't have Nintendo's say, that don't have Nintendo's seal of approval. Or you're going to see it kind of drop off the map altogether as people say, well, this major didn't host it, so there must not be enough interest in it, and so we're going to stop hosting it on a local scene. In the wake of the PMDT disbanding announcement, some of the communities did have a drop. They had a drop of people as the idea was, well, this game isn't being supported anymore. It's a dead game where we love it, but we might as well not play it because we want to play a game that'll last. And they moved to Smash 4, they moved to Melee. You're also having some scenes saying, now that we don't have a changing build, we can explore this game to its fullest. We can push on, and you're seeing some of those scenes grow immensely. And it really depends on which side ends up winning, I guess. Which is a weird way to say that. I don't know. We're in a really weird spot with PM right now.
I was going to ask, does it fill you with optimism? But I feel like I feel like you ended really somberly.
No, I think it does fill me with optimism, at least for Minnesota. For Minnesota, we're seeing numbers that we haven't experienced in a long time. We're seeing a lot of people be interested. I know that I've heard from people who've said that they held off from playing PM because for so long they didn't want their character to be changed. They didn't want it to be nerfed. I know there's major players like Wizrobe, for example, of 20GX Falcon fame, kind of got his start in the Smash scene through PM Sonic. Won some huge events. If you go look up Wizrobe Sonic on YouTube, you'll find him just destroying Mewtwo King. It was disgusting. And he feels that his character was nerfed because of him directly, which it might have been. But when you feel like if anybody does well with his character, they're going to be nerfed, or this character that I put a lot of time into is changed, even if it wasn't a nerf, but just a change, you're kind of holding back. And now there's a lot of people who are joining because that's not going to happen anymore. I'm seeing a lot of the TOs kind of band together right now. There's a lot of discussion on what can we do both in our individual scenes, which is the immediate answer is keep running the game, keep hosting tournaments. But the larger answer is we are trying to figure out what this means for a national scene. Because as we've been shown with Melee and Smash 4, every time we have a major tournament like EVO or like Apex or CEO even, you kind of have a rising tide of all of these other people entering. They start entering, they start looking towards, I watched this thing on Twitch and it was great. What can we do? PM we can't stream on Twitch. We don't have an official game title anymore, despite we used to have one. Things like that. We found a home within Hitbox, which has been amazing to us. But we're kind of trying to figure that out. What does the national scene for PM look like? How do we host tournaments when, like we've been saying, a lot of tournaments seem to be moving towards corporatism. And corporatism and PM, as of right now at least, don't seem to be mixing. And so what does that mean? How do we host regionals? How do we host grassroots nationals?
It means we hold out for Melee HD.
Yeah. No, Melee HD, if you go into the options, you're going to be able to change from between the two different versions of NTC and PAL. But if you go a step further, it has a PM option as well. It's great.
I'm going to go on record in saying I hate that meme, but
I do too. Okay. But it's the thing.
So, I mean, a piece of optimism here, or a reason to be optimistic, is something we can look forward to in 2016. And yes, we're going to advertise it, and no, you can't stop us. We have the Midwest Circuit coming up all throughout 2016, which all feature PM. I mean, PM is at every event planned so far. It's certainly at ours in Minneapolis. Yep. It's at Dismantle this weekend. I believe it's at the Valentine's Day one, which has a silly name. And then every month after that until July, and indeed the finale will probably be in mid-August. And so every month from January through to August, there's a large Midwest tournament happening. I'm going to presume that all have PM. That's not an official thing. I could be wrong. But from where I stand right now, it seems like they'll all have PM. And that's huge because even if PM isn't part of the circuit, which it isn't in terms of point.
It doesn't get points, but it's still present at every event.
Absolutely. And we know from Kings of the North, and we know from these other large tournaments, there is a home for PM here in the Midwest. And hopefully what it does is it inspires folks who live on the outskirts of these areas towards the peripheries of the Midwest circuit, places like MDVA or New York, or even going south like Louisiana and that, to go to their closest Midwest circuit and play PM and, Melee Smash 4 if they're so inclined. But to come out and play PM, because these are places where, even if it doesn't matter for the circuit finale, these are going to be huge events with lots of folks. And it might be a great spot even for people who are just thinking about picking up PM to grab it, learn it, and try it out at a regional. You're going to probably go anyway for Smash 4 or Melee.
Yeah,
go
might as well add $10 to your registration and try this game out.
Absolutely. Play Olimar.
Lord knows, there's like none of them.
Yeah.
There's you.
Well, yeah, my little
Blue plays in state.
My little fledgling Olimar.
There's like 3 Olimars.
But beyond that, 2016, beyond just the Midwest circuit, has a lot to look forward to in terms of other events too. We have another Evo coming in July in Las Vegas. We have Smash and Splash happening locally in June.
What's it called? Pound 6? Pound 5? Pound 6.
Oh yeah, Pound. I totally forgot about Pound.
Mm-hmm. Pound is going to be the return, or at least that's what they're billing it as. Pound 6 is going to be the return of the East Coast National.
Which it needs desperately after Apex is in a weird spot after,
Apex keeps climbing up to say, hey, we're back, and everyone just kind of keeps pushing it down, saying, no, we don't want you back. I don't want Apex back. I'm going to go on record in saying that. I think something like Apex would be amazing, but Apex itself is known for not, even before the issues with Alex Strife and the building collapsing, they weren't known for hosting good tournaments. They were known for the tournament that everybody was at, though.
But yeah, so 2016 is shaping up, especially throughout the Midwest, to be a very, very busy month or year regionally. Thinking just in Minnesota, we still have the monthlies. We still have U of M weeklies which are growing up. There'll be the return of Pummel and LL to look forward to. It's going to be a very busy beginning, middle, and end of 2016. And so there's certainly no lack of tournaments for any of the games you play, 64 included. We have a 64 Arcadian coming up in Minnesota.
In February, you can go to a tournament that 2 people can attend, but those 2 people are really good, so be happy about that one. And they said they'd be there specifically just to help people out.
And beyond that, there's even a vague Brawl revivalist movement. I don't know that it's manifested too strongly in Minnesota, but it exists in the national scene. You see it with Genesis wanting to do an 8-person Brawl invitational. Xanadu at the last part of this year proposed running Brawl with a no Meta Knight, no Ice Climbers rule set. There's a potential for even Brawl to come out of the shadows and to reclaim a little bit of its former glory. So there's just stuff for everybody in early 2016 and late 2016. So there's a lot to look forward to, a lot to be optimistic. Don't mourn the death of PM because PM isn't dead.
And I am going to say the same thing. Don't mourn the death of Smash 4 if the patches don't keep happening. None of these games are dead. They're going to keep growing. We thought, especially before Smash 4 was released, with everything that happened in 2014, after the kind of like Evo revival, after the documentary was released, we thought 2014 was huge. And like we said before, almost every single tournament in the top 10 of money made and entrant this year. I only see Smash growing.
And that's really it. We asked a lot of questions this episode about what's coming in 2016. And though it might seem like it's up to Sam and I to figure out these answers, it's up to all of us as a community to figure out what these answers to these many different kinds of questions we've posed look like. Continue going to tournaments, continue supporting local scenes, regional scenes, national scenes. But if you don't like something, don't give it your money. We can help change the way things happen in this community if we don't like them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your money, your attendance is going to be key to all of this.
So we love you.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here. Until next time, keep bouncing more fish, and we will talk to you later.